Hi there, welcome back to North Lake Photographic Workshops, and welcome back to part 2 of our printing session that we've been working on here. If you were here the other day, we were working on the platinum layer of this print from Iceland that I took back in 2015. Now, what I've done is I've done the palladium layer here, and next up today is going to be the gum layers that we're going to put on here. But first I'd like to talk a little bit about why I'm doing this and why I like to add a gum layer in different colors and pigment to the prints that I'm making. I mean, there's those in the platinum and palladium community that would think, why would I want to ruin a perfectly good platinum print by putting a gum layer over it, or anything else that I do sometimes, like cyanotype or anything else. And the reason being is that I like to add a little bit of depth, a little bit of color, a little bit of tonality to the prints. And what happens is after you've done that with one of these prints, it can add, even though these are beautiful images, and don't get me wrong, I mean, there's nothing like a beautiful palladium print. It's got one of the widest exposure scales of all of the printing processes, which means that it has the greatest number of tones between black and white. And as a matter of fact, if you're doing it correctly, there really isn't a true black in the palladium process. And that's one of the problems with the kind of acquired taste of people's appreciation of them. I mean, some people love them to begin with. Other people who are more schooled in silver printing and more contrasty types of prints think they look a little anemic, perhaps, and that's just because they have that full range of tones. I mean, they can be really beautiful, like jewels. Now, what happens with a gum over platinum print is it sort of marries the two worlds a little bit. What you do is you still get that really wide exposure scale, but you end up adding a little bit of contrast, if you will. It adds up a little bit of Dmax. And it also adds a little bit of coloring. So, you know, if you're used to a silver process and you've ever done any sepia toning or selenium toning, it's much the same effect as that. I mean, in the process of gum over platinum, I'm really not out to create a color image per se, or any kind of representation of what a color image would have been, or a color shot would have been in the beginning, or a color photograph capture would have been in the beginning. What I'm trying to do is just add this tonality, which is why in the pigment process and adding the pigment to the gum arabic, I'm not adding a lot of it in there. I'm not going for a real heavy color. I'm just going for a thinly veiled color that will add some tonality and add some just a different atmosphere to a normal palladium print. So that's what we're going to be doing here. So what we're going to do, if you've ever seen the other gum over palladium process video that I've done, I'll link that up here as well, and I'll also link that below. Because it's a pretty intricate process, and although I'm taking you through it in these two videos, I'm not really giving you an instructional version of it, and it's not really intended to be that. I'm just kind of taking you through the process that I'm going through in working up this portfolio and starting to decide what I'm going to actually do with these prints from Iceland that I've been working on for 20 years. So anyway, this is the first one, Basalt Cliffs. I'm really happy with it. And again, if you haven't seen the making of this, the link will be up here or below as well for part 1. So the other day we went through making this one. We made the big one after making 6 versions of a proof, which I also have a smaller proof here. This was my final proof before we finally made this final larger image. Now, I'm going to do the same thing with this. I'm going to use this as a proof, and when we go back in the darkroom, I'm going to also make this print the same way that I'm going to make this one, although I'm going to do this one first so that way I'm not working on my final image. But the goal, in effect, the goal in the end is to make this print my finished print and begin this whole journey that I'm going to go through in making this first portfolio of my Iceland work. So yeah, we're going to go in the darkroom, and just to explain a little bit about what we're going to do is I've already switched on my hot plate in there to warm up my gelatin. Now I've made a gelatin sizing out of just normal gelatin, Aussian gelatin, You can get it from the grocery store, but I buy mine from Bostic and Sullivan. And what I've done is I've mixed that in with some water and heated it up, and it's bloomed and mixed up nicely, and it's ready to go. So what I'm going to do is make a sizing coating on this paper, and then I will be drying both of these prints once they're sized, and then they'll be ready for their gum layer. So next up we'll be doing the sizing, and I'm going to take you into the darkroom to do that, all right? So stick with me now, and we're going to be getting on to the next step here. Okay, so as I mentioned, I had already gotten my gelatin sizing ready to go in here. So it's nice and warm, and it's mixed up quite nicely and ready to go. So if you want to know more about this, again, check out my series on gum over platinum printing, and there is a link in there to how to mix your sizing. So I'll try to put a link of that to that up here right now and below. But again, there's more information on mixing that up in that video. So what we're going to do is we need that. We need a coating rod that I have right back here, and I need a small beaker, which I have right here. And then what we're going to do is we need also a little bit of formaldehyde. Now, formaldehyde can also be replaced with glyoxide, although I like to use the formaldehyde because it doesn't change the color of my sizing at all, and glyoxide tends to yellow it a little bit. But if you're concerned about using formaldehyde, go with glyoxide. Again, the formaldehyde, you're using such tiny amounts. We're going to use like 2 drops of this. But anyway, so what I'm going to do here is we're going to take first the first print, which I'm going to do one of the proof prints. Now, the reason I'm not doing all of my proof prints is because I want to have the best representation of what this final is going to look like, and this is the one that I matched the big one to. So let's go ahead with that. I'm going to set that down here. Now what we're going to want to do is pour out a little bit of the sizing into the beaker. I'm just going to do about, 10 milliliters. And then I use a little bit of formaldehyde in there, 1 to 2 drops. I'm going to go with 2, 1, 2. I like to use 1 drop for every 10 milliliters. And there's other people who like to go a little bit stronger with it, but I tend to like to go this way. It lets me work with my sizing a little bit longer so it doesn't start to harden already. So here we go. I'll take it and I'll just pour it down the length of the print, and then what I'm going to do is just drag it across lightly across the surface of the print, and especially over the image area. Then I also like to push it up, and my idea of this is I like to cover the whole piece of paper. Again, some people just cover the image itself, but I like to go with the whole piece of paper. Then I draw it off, and then I'm going to draw it off on the upper layer here. All right, now that's all I need to do with this, and I'm going to take this and put it over on my drying rack. Now comes the big print. So what I'm going to do with this is change up my paper towel underneath, give myself some new paper towel to absorb, and that way I'm not sizing the back of the print. Not that that's a problem, but I just like a nice clean workflow. So here we go. We're going to put the regular print down here, the big print. I'm going to mix up a little bit more sizing. Now again, I've been given a little bit of extra time with this because I didn't use a whole lot of formaldehyde in here. So here we go. A couple of drops of formaldehyde in there. Mix it up real good. And then we're going to come over here on the print, and I'm going to pour it all the way down. Now I'm once again going to draw it across and cover my image area first. Same with the area of this puddle here. All right, now I've got my image covered. I'm covering the rest of my paper. And I'm drawing it off. And again, drawing it off. All right, now I've gotten really good coverage on my print, I can see with that here. All right, So now I'm going to take this over onto the my drying rack and let it dry out. Okay, now that's going to take a good half hour to an hour to dry. So I'll be back with you after that. But what I'm going to be doing after that is mixing up the pigment and showing you how I add the pigment to the gum arabic, and then with a little bit of ammonium dichromate. And then we are once again going to coat that print and eventually take the original negative, re-register it, and make another exposure. All right? So stick with me. Okay, so we've got the gelatin is dried. The gelatin sizing is dried really nicely, and I've actually taken the liberty to go ahead and do the masking on these prints. I have masked them both, the proof that we're going to be using as well as the final print. And what I'm going to be doing here is mixing up my gum arabic and pigment along with ammonium dichromate. I've got a 30% solution of ammonium dichromate here. Now, what I've done is I've taken a little bit of gum arabic as well, and I've mixed that in with my pigments. And this is a French ochre that I like to use, and this is a burnt umber that I like to use. Now, what I do is I mix this fairly diluted in a, let's see, I go like 5 grams of the raw pigment in with 20 ounces of the gum arabic in here. And then I shake it up really good, get it really mixed well. And then what happens is I'm going to also use this film canister. I've got like some old film canisters from Kodak film. And I mix up like a 50-50 ratio, a 1-to-1 ratio of my pigment mix along with my ammonium dichromate. Now, for the newer person, more untrained or whatever, I would say use some nitrile gloves right now. I don't have any, but I'm very careful when I use this because ammonium dichromate is a carcinogen, and you want to be very careful with it, especially if you're in a powder form. You want to be able to use that with a mask if you're working with it that way. But what I'm going to do is mix up a small amount of that, and then I'm going to recap it right away just to be safe. And then I'm going to take a little bit of my French ochre, which is my lighter color. Now, I've already mixed this up pretty good today. And I'm going to mix that in until it's about a 1-to-1 solution. And I'll set that down. Then I cap this real carefully. Shake it up. Okay, so now this is going to be enough to use on both of these prints. And because I like this color, I'm going to go ahead and use it on both of them anyway, even though I'm doing a proof against the final. What I'm using the proof for more here is to work on my exposure. Now let me explain a little bit about that. With the gum, I'm going to be using the same negative. I'm not going to be using a different negative for my highlights and for my shadow detail, or my shadow areas. But what I am going to do is control where the color goes by the exposure. Now, the longer you expose an area in the image, the harder the gum becomes. Actually, let's step back a little bit. When I mix an organic solution, which gum arabic is, along with the ammonium dichromate, it becomes light sensitive. And therefore, when I cover the surface, anywhere that I give a lot of light, it will harden that gum to the surface there. And that will stay. In an area where it hasn't had so much light, will be a little softer, and as I develop it in water, is the way we develop it, that will soften up and wash out. So I'm actually going to be throwing more color into the areas where it sticks, which in this case, I want to put the color, the highlighted color, which is the French ochre. I want to put that into the highlights. So I'm going to have to expose that a little bit longer. The reason being is in the negative, that's the thicker area of the negative, right? A lighter area of the print is the thicker area or the darker area of the negative. So you have to expose it with a little bit more light to get it through that and to give yourself some color in that highlight area. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. So it's just the varying degrees of exposure help you keep it in that area. So what I will do then is go with the darker color later, which will be the umber, the burnt umber, and that I will give a shorter exposure to. So it will only go into the shadow areas and stay out of the highlights, so that when I wash it out or develop it in the sink, that color will stay more in the shadow areas rather than the highlight. And therefore, I'll have an effective split tone of more of a yellow French ochre up in the highlights and a little bit darker burnt umber down in the shadow detail areas. So let's go ahead and do this right now. Now that I've got this all mixed out, I'm going to take it off carefully, set it off to the side, and just pour it out on the surface of a piece of acrylic here that I have. And then I'm going to take a roller. These rollers you can get at any Home Depot or hardware store. I use them quite often in this process. And then I just take that roller and I roll it out onto the surface of the acrylic, and then I take it and roll it over here onto the print. Now I want to be careful to cover the whole area of the print. I want to make sure it goes into the corner areas and everything else. Now the yellow pigments often go on very easily and nice and even. So I don't really have to worry about going in it afterward and smoothing it out with a second roller, but I'm going to do that anyway, just for the benefit of the video. And what will happen is this just sort of evens it out, and if there's any areas that have any kind of modeling or maybe bubbles built up, it'll help smooth it out in that area. So as you can see, I have that covered nicely. Now what I'm going to do is peel off my masking. And as you can see, or maybe you can't here because I've got the brushed borders on this print, I've got a nice even coating here, bordered with the nice borders there. So I'm going to put this over on the drying rack. We need this to dry before we make our exposure. So while I've got this out, like I say, I'm going to go with our regular finish print, and I'm also going to coat it with the same rollers and the same solution. There's plenty of it there. Like I say, I'm only putting a thin coat of this over there. I'm not trying to really give it a bright yellow color. I'm just throwing some accent of color into the highlight areas is what I'm really trying to do here. So as you can see, I've got the rollers drying out, but I've still got plenty on there. All right, now I'm going to go through here, smooth it out a little bit with the other roller. Just make sure that I don't have any big obvious streaks in there or anything. And you can keep going over it. I'm not really pressing hard right now. I'm just going with the weight of the roller, but I'm going kind of fast because I want it to level out. There we go. So also, once again, I'm going to peel off my masking. There we go. I'm going to put it over on the drying rack as well. Then I'm going to wash my hands and put everything away and get ready for our next step. We've got to let this one dry before we go to the next step, so I hope you'll stick with me. Okay, so now I've got both prints dry and they're ready to go. You want to make sure that they're nice and dry first because you don't want to be sticking your negative to it and destroying the negative after you've gone this far, because although you can make another one, you want to keep using the same one several times throughout this process. So we're going to start out with the proof print first, and what I need to do is get the negative re-registered with this. This is the original negative that I printed with, and as you can see, I didn't mask this one, but it doesn't matter. I've only coated the area of the print that's unmasked anyway. So here we go. This is the fun part. I like putting the negative back on top. You just make sure that you got no light shining through afterward, and you know you have it in place. Now it's easy to register a smaller print like this, but on bigger prints, you might want to use registration pins, but that's for another video. So anyway, once I've got that set up pretty well how I want it, I'll put a piece of tape over here on one side just to make sure it stays in registration, okay? I'm going to set that off here. Now at the same time, or no, not at the same time, I'm just going to go about getting the other negative right now, and I'm going to match it up with the big print. So now I'll do the big print, and with this one, I have got the mask negative, so I've got some other lines to go by in my registration. But this is a fairly easy print to register. And actually, to be honest, if you get it a little bit out of registration, it can work to your benefit because it can give it a little bit of a 3D effect somewhat and add a little bit more to the final print. You just have to experiment. But for this one, I'm going to try to get it right on. There we go. And once again, I'll set up a piece of tape here and maybe another one up on top to keep it in registration before I put it into the print frame. So I can turn off the light. I'm going to set that one off to the side, and what I'm going to do is get this one into its print frame and ready to go. Now, as a rule for myself, for my highlights, I like to go kind of the same exposure that I did for the original palladium image. So what I'm going to do on this is give it 9 minutes, and then we're going to develop it out from that. And the other thing is when we develop, we're only developing in lukewarm water this time. So anyway, I'll get to that in a minute and we'll show you. Okay, so now we have our first layer exposed on the proof print, and it's time to develop it. Now we're just developing it here in plain water, lukewarm water, and I'm going to develop it face down because the dichromate is going to fall out first. But I do want to curdle it first before I go in because I want all the surface to be covered by water. And then I rock it so that I make sure that there's no bubbles underneath, because bubbles can cause modeling in the surface because it can prevent development in certain areas. So what I'm going to do is let it rock here for a little bit. And as you can see, the water is kind of turning yellow, and that's the dichromate falling out. And soon I'll be able to lift it up and you'll start to see the effects. Once the dichromate has gone out and that color is removed, you'll start to see the effect of the layer on the print, and you'll see how nice it actually is. Let's see here. Have a look. Oh yeah, it's already looking pretty good. So let me flip it over here. Yeah, it's looking really nice. Now this again was a 9-minute exposure. It's a little heavy right now, but more of it will come out here in the wash. So I'm just going to let this sit here for a little bit. But I know now that this will be a good exposure for the larger print that I'm going to do next. So what I'm going to do is let this go here for a couple more minutes and show you, and then I'm going to go through the process of rinsing it out, hanging it up to dry, and then we'll get going on the next exposure of the larger print. And we'll see where it goes from there. Oh yeah, it's looking really nice. Really nice. Let me grip this up and you can see. See, it's got a lot of nice color to it right now. That's going to fade a bit more as I rinse it a little bit more, and it will also fade in the drying process. But you'll definitely see a difference between that and what it was before. All right, so let's look at this once again. All right, I'm going to get this, go through the process, get this rinsed and hang it up to dry, and then I'm going to go get going on the next exposure. So stick with me. So now that we've established the correct exposure, the 9 minutes for our first layer with the proof, it's time to put this one into the developer. I've just made that exposure. So let's get to it and see what happens here. Again, I put it in face down and make sure that I rock it back and forth to get all the bubbles that might be in there out from underneath. As you can see, the water's already kind of turning yellow here because of the dichromate coming out. I'm going to let it go for a little bit before I lift it up. But I can be pretty sure that it's going to look like the first exposure that I made on the proof print. Yeah, so let's have a look at this in a minute here. see what we got. Oh yeah, woo. Okay. It's beautiful, as you can see here. It's looking really good. Still got some of the dichromate in the pigment, but it's looking really nice. So we're gonna let it go here for a couple more minutes. And then I'm gonna rinse it off and we're gonna hang it up to dry. And then we'll get on to the next layer, which is going to be the burnt umber layer. Let's see what we got going here now. Let me flip it over. Yeah. See, there's a little bit more to come out, I think, but see how it adds just a nice tone to that already beautiful print. Okay. Give it a couple more minutes and then we'll get back to it with the next layer. So stick with me. We're getting close now. So now that we've got the colors set and we have our first exposure done, it's time to do the second color coding. And so what I've done is I've already gone ahead on my proof print here and I've masked it off and I'm ready to go. So what I'm going to do now is do the layer of the burnt umber that I was telling you about earlier. So I'm going to set that up right now. I'm going to mix it up with my ammonium dichromate. Once again, wear gloves if you are doing this. Do as I say, not as I do. Close that up, and then I am going to do a shake up, and then I'm going to pour it out, get ready to go, and get my rollers and do my coating. Should have poured out more here. There we go. Now it's going to look pretty dark, but you're also going to see that kind of yellowish cast to it, which comes from the dichromate. Now, as you can see here, this pigment doesn't quite go on as easy. It's a little bit mottled and things, so that's why the second one is very important to go over and kind of smooth everything out. And sometimes what I do is I'll even take some paper towel and get a little bit of the pigment out of it as I'm going, and I go back over. Just to get a nice smooth coating. Yeah, and like I say, if I go back and forth, it helps just with the weight of the roller. There, that's looking really nice. Okay, so that's good, and I'm going to take off the masking and put this off to the side to dry. And while that's happening, I'm actually going to coat the second print, the larger print, so that I have that on hand when it comes time to actually make my, my print. But again, we're going to use the proof print to check the exposure. Now, one of the things I want to do is I don't want to be pushing any of the color into the highlights where I already have the sort of yellowish ochre color. So what I'm going to be doing is a much shorter exposure on this second one, because where I want it to go is into the shadow detail and into these darker areas. Now, because the negative is thinner in those areas, I don't need quite as much exposure. And so what I'm going to try to do is find that line between pushing it up into the highlights and keeping it in the shadows. So I'm thinking that my exposure on this is probably going to be around the 4-minute mark, considering I did 9 minutes for the original. So let's set this off to dry, off to the side to dry right now, and then I'm going to get on with the coating of the bigger print, and then I'll come back to you when we get ready to develop them. So stick with me, we're almost there. Okay, We have second coat done on our proof print right now, and this was the burnt umber layer, and I ended up giving it just a 3-minute exposure because I was a little afraid that it would be pushing too much of the color into the highlights, which I didn't want. So again, this is just a proof. Based upon this, I can then make my final exposure with the larger print, which I've also coated with the second layer of gum. So anyway, let's get on with it. I'm going to drop it in like usual, face down, with a bit of a curl, give it some motion so that we get all the bubbles out from underneath it, and then just be patient. Let it rock a bit. You can start seeing the yellow coming up. Yeah. Okay, almost time to have a peek. Let's see what its orientation is here. Ooh, I can already see that it's looking pretty good. It's still looking kind of yellow from the dichromate, but it's going to look really good. Yeah, you can start to see that color coming in there. Give me this nice kind of brownish in these darker shadow areas. Now with this one, I'm going to be real patient and let the let the pigment come out, let the gum come out where it's supposed to. You can see already that it's lightening in the areas where it's supposed to just remain kind of yellow. It's really looking good, nice and rich. I'm going to let it cook there for a little while. So in the meantime, I've gone through, like I said, and I've coated both of these prints, both my smaller proof print and my larger print, with the burnt umber layer. And knowing that there would be no difference in the coating, it's just going to be in the exposure. So I'll get a pretty good idea from this one. And as it stands right now, I'm kind of thinking that I might pull back on the burnt umber exposure a little bit more, even in the larger print, maybe go 2 minutes. But we'll see here. I'm going to let this one cook for a while. In the larger print, it's even going to be better. Okay, let's let this go. I'm going to let it soak here for a while, then I'll go through the normal rinse and the hang up and dry, and then I'm going to, based upon what I find in this print, I'm going to do the exposure on the larger print, and then we'll come back and do that one. It's getting exciting now. Coming down the home stretch. I hope you'll stick with me. Well, as you can see, this is really nice. I'm very pleased. This is definitely the exposure I'm going to go with on the larger print. So I'm going to make that exposure right now, and then we'll do the processing on the big one. So yeah, I'm really pleased. This works out okay. This will be it. I'll take the notes on this print, and I'll make a few more on this one. I really don't know what I'm going to do with this portfolio yet, but I'm really glad to be working out these prints. So let's get that other exposure going, and stick with me. Okay, so here it is, the big moment. I've made the second layer on this. The second gum layer was put on this and dried, and then I've just made the exposure. We did a 3-minute exposure on the second one, so that's a 9-minute exposure on the first layer, which was the French ochre layer. And then on this one, the burnt umber, I've done 3 minutes. So let's get to developing this and see what happens. On this one, I really want to make sure that there's no bubbles underneath. Yeah, you can see the dichromate coming out right away. Now, being a bigger print it shouldn't change too much in the final outcome, but it will be larger. It'll be a little more open, and therefore, it might change my exposure, but I'm doubting it. Anyway, we'll see here in a minute. Oh, yeah. Okay, you can already see. You You can see here that there's still pigment coming out of here, but yeah, this is really going to be spectacular. And it's looking a lot like my proof print, which is great. Exactly what you want. Oh yeah. It's really starting to take shape here. Now I'll end up speeding this up a little bit so you're not waiting all this time with me, because I'm guessing the development time on this one is going to be somewhere around 10 minutes or so. Oh yeah, look at that. See, now here you can see how the pigment's starting to wash out of the areas where I really don't want it, but it is staying here in the shadow areas and in the cliff face. Oh, yeah. I get pretty excited when these things are working out like this. I mean, you can see it's been, you know, I've been at this a whole day now. It's dark outside. Got some storms on the way, snowstorms. It's going to be really something. Or so that's forecast. And if that's the case, I'll do a little video and share that with you as well. Oh yeah, see, now you can see how it's starting to come out more. You know, I don't want that brownish red up in these highlight areas. I want it to be the nice yellow that we've had, the ochre. And it's working out perfectly. And you can see here in the areas where it goes from, you know, more shadow, darker in the sky and the darker cloud areas to the lighter areas where it sort of blends nicely. The two colors blend nicely. Yep, I'm very happy with this. The choice of colors can be, you know, it's a personal preference, of course, but, you know, it can be everything. And I think I chose right on this one. I know this is going to work out well. I don't want to bore you anymore. What I'm going to do is the next we talk here, I'm going to have this finished, washed and dried, and we'll talk a little bit about it for the close, but really got to thank you for sticking it out. You can see what goes into these prints. You know, and I know that there's people out there that think, well, why don't I just get on the inkjet and make a print this color? But it's just not quite the same thing, you know, and it's this tactile feeling, and when you're building up these gum layers, it gives it some relief, and there's, you know, there's a dimensionality to it, and it's really, really something. Anyway, I can go on forever. We'll talk soon, all right? Stick with me. Okay, well, here we go. All dried, flattened, and ready to go. The fruits of a good day of printing. And yeah, it's been a long day, and obviously there's been a lot that's gone into this print, but I think that, in my opinion, it's worth everything, every minute that's gone into it. It's got real nice depth and color, and it just feels a lot more present than the original palladium print. Now again, I know that there's those purists that think the palladium print is better, but in my opinion, this is the way to go, and I'm very pleased with it. So anyway, yeah, I tell you, it takes a long time to make one of these prints, and it's definitely worth it. And a little bit of you know, disclosure, full disclosure here is that obviously I've had a haircut since I started this. I tried to make these, when I do these videos, these instructional videos, very often, I try to make it seem like it's just one day, because naturally, I mean, it is. It doesn't take me 3 days to make one print unless I'm really busy doing other things. But when I'm shooting these videos, very often it takes me some time. So I try to keep the continuity going. I wear the same clothes for the whole shoot, you know, and I hopefully keep my hair the same length. But I was having a hard time looking at myself in editing things that I had already shot, because I was just looking so wild and woolly, and you know, it's coming up here to the holiday and I really wanted to get my hair cut. So I had an appointment to go, and I took it before I was able to finish this video. So anyway, yeah, this is the third day of my my new Chris Mars t-shirt here. So just to give a plug to Chris, great drummer from The Replacements, and a wonderful artist. I've loved his work for many years, and he's been putting out this line of limited edition t-shirts. So Google him, Chris Mars, just like it sounds, spelled just like it sounds, and you know, you might get in on one of these. I really like them a lot. So thanks to Chris Mars, his wife Sally, and thanks for sticking with me while I've been making this print. And if you liked what you saw, give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already, tell a friend maybe. And I'm gonna be doing more of these. Like I say, I'm really happy to be getting going on this Iceland portfolio. And I think I'm gonna do some more of these videos of making the prints as well, so stay tuned and we'll get back to another one of these soon, all right? Thanks a lot. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.